Good afternoon, my dear friends. Welcome to the Universal Philosophical Community, the White Tower. Today, our guest is Dr. Daniel Dal Monte. Good afternoon, Dr. Dal Monte. Once again, we're
Hello,
very
Dimitri.
pleased to have you here with us.
Thank you.
So a few things about Dr. Dal Monte. He received his doctorate in philosophy from Temple University in 2021. He specializes in metaphysics with a particular focus on the issue of free will, Kant's free will. His research centers on the Western philosophical tradition, particularly the ideas of Immanuel Kant, while he's also developing an interest in Eastern philosophy. He's a lecturer right now at Rowan University and Jefferson University, and he's also active on Substack with his blog Philosophy, Spirituality and Culture. He's also the author of a textbook for critical thinking and classes on logic for university students, which is called The Logical Worldview, Skills to Distinguish Fact from Fiction in the Contemporary Information War. A great book, I have to say, once more. We know that there are many interlocutors who try to analyze their positions in front of their audiences in many ways. But more often than not, they do not always use a reasoning process when they talk. I mean, they often use some non-arguments. And for example, jokes, descriptions, explanations, which are mistakenly thought to be part of the reasoning process. And in such a way, they lead to the disorientation of their listeners. So, as a first question, in what cases do we have to use arguments in our speech? And if we want to deliver speech and carry out a message, how can we move from an argument to a non-argument without confusing our listeners?
Yeah, so very good question. Thank you, Dimitris. This is the section on argument analysis techniques. And so why is this important? People talk or people write something. We're in the age of social media, and people are communicating on these platforms, and they're making arguments, but oftentimes in ways that are crude, that are quite raw, that mix in what is not an argument. So it can be quite confusing. Someone can be easily disoriented. People get emotional, and as a result, we lose sight of what people are actually saying. And so in this section, we have techniques for distilling what someone is actually saying. So we are going to synthesize here just to connect to our previous discussions. Last time we had practical logic. We were talking about these debates like transhumanism or even abortion, where we apply logic to a certain controversy. Okay, and then we have formal logic, which is this kind of like a math of thinking, which seems very abstract, but actually you can synthesize both of them to map out an argument. So we're going to try to extract an argument from natural speech, natural language. Okay, so we have people talking, debating. Now you're going to have mixed into their argument things that are not arguments. So a description is not an argument. So if I say, there's a picture behind Dimitris, the picture has a tower, I'm wearing a pink shirt. These are just descriptions. These are not arguments. I could tell a joke. I could command someone, hey, clean your room. None of these are arguments, so they're not bad. These are not bad things. But if we're trying to look at an argument is when someone claims to have new knowledge. It's an important part of thinking, where we say, okay, because this is true, therefore this other thing is true. So when we have an argument, we reason, we generate a new knowledge.
Yeah,
when I describe, I'm just
the added value of an argument.
Yeah, it's a crucial part, because someone is saying, okay, because this is true, now I can infer this new idea. Okay, well, let's zero in on that. Other things are fine. They're parts of human interaction. However, they can distract. This is where we get into psychology. Someone can tell a joke. Someone is very charismatic. They are not using logic in a good way. The jokes can distract. It can distract from what they're actually saying. So we look at the argument to see what they're trying to conclude. So an argument has to have a couple parts, a premise, and a conclusion. So you have a basis for the reasoning, and then you have a conclusion that you generate from the premise. And this is a step that is crucial. We have to find out where the person is coming from. And to do that, we have to kind of get rid of some of the noise. Make sure that we're focusing on the argument itself and not getting drawn in by the way they look, their style of delivery, the jokes they may tell, descriptions or stories they include in their discourse.
Very nice. So I've got to focus on the inferential sequence of thoughts, strictly on the reasoning process, and not get distracted by all this information that come along.
Exactly.
That's great. Now, when it comes to public debates, I would like you to clarify on the speaker's intentions and motives, because more often than not, we take part in public debates and participants are divided into two poles. Many participants claim to advance their knowledge from data they already know to new positions. But the thing is that there are many speakers who do not include a premise or a conclusion as they speak, as they deploy their own thoughts and analyze their own arguments, and they do it so as to have a greater rhetorical effect. Now, I'd like you to tell us what practical techniques can we use as observers and active listeners to better understand the message of the speakers.
Yeah, for sure. We have many speakers who are not careful about all the steps they take to reach their conclusion. They don't have a diagram. You think of like a politician. They don't have a diagram showing.
Yeah.
Here's how I'm reasoning. It's more. It's very emotional. There's lots of psychology involved, not logic. And so this is actually very. It can be very dangerous when you have someone who is not being fully explicit about the way they think. So how do we as listeners get to the core of what they're saying? And it has to be in a relatively short time. It takes practice. So, with my students, we go through arguments in a very deliberate way. We extract them from the text, and we will put it in what's called standard form, where we take it premise by premise, and number the premises. And we do this in the section in my book where you actually have a map. You are creating a diagram and you are numbering it, and so you can distill that argument in its structure in a very clear way. And we have different ways to symbolize how the argument works. So with my students, we'll do this in a very deliberate way. It takes time. It could take a whole class period, like 50 minutes or something. But it's a habit that you build. And so part of this would just be building a habit where you become very attuned to someone's reasoning, and you can capture it right away. So I feel like for my first answer to your question, you have to build this habit by mapping. At first, it's going to feel awkward, but the more you do it, the quicker you'll be able to pick up on the way someone is reasoning. This could be important in therapy. The way we reason could generate problems. So you can pick up how someone's reasoning. That is very significant. So first thing, good habits. Second thing, you're looking for certain indicator words. Someone may not be fully explicit, but they could use certain indicator words. There's connective words that we use in various languages. I'm sure Greek has them as well, but they're not names of things, but they're names of how the sentences are connected logically. So, for instance, the word "therefore."
We're talking about cohesion.
Yes, cohesion. How the ideas are connected, and we have many words that are not for things, but they're for the way the thoughts are related. So, a word like "therefore," ergo would be Latin. So this is true. Therefore, well, this is true. So someone uses the word "therefore," then they're signaling, okay, this is how I'm thinking. This is true, therefore this is true. And so you can stop there and say, okay, well, I can see that you believe that this other idea is the basis for this new idea you're trying to argue for. So there's many words like this. So maybe this implies, consequently, this demonstrates. So I have a whole list here in the book. You will look for these indicator words that help you map out the logic of the speaker or the interlocutor. Now, in some cases, these may not exist. So, and there's a technical word for this, enthymeme. Yeah. But enthymeme would be it's omitting certain premises or conclusion. It doesn't say it. And this is common in our reasoning. Like I said, we don't stop and draw a diagram. We expect to be understood, and sometimes it can be a very good rhetorical effect, where we don't state the conclusion. We let the reader or our interlocutor discover it for themselves. So maybe like Socrates would have a style like this, where he didn't give the interlocutor the conclusion. The interlocutor would generate it on their own. So the idea of the midwife, I think it's called the maieutic method of Socrates. This is kind of an enthymeme. He's leaving out the conclusion. He's letting you reason on your own. This can be effective as a rhetorical strategy, but it can also be deceptive, where we're just missing parts of the argument. We don't really know how it works, and so we're more inclined to misunderstand it, or to to be deceived by it. Now, one more thing here is the principle of charity. Now, what does this mean? It has a technical meaning here. It's not saying that we should always be nice or always be charitable. No, it's saying that when you are serious in a debate, you are trying your best to understand the other person. You're not trying to make it better than it really is, but you're trying to make as much sense as you can of what they're saying. Because if you underestimate their argument, then you're not really arguing with them. You're arguing with a false version of their point. So, and that just generates anger. The person feels like they're misunderstood, and it doesn't really advance the conversation because there's a deviance has been created. We've been diverted into a debate about something else. We're not debating their idea. So when we have the principle of charity, it's maybe not as entertaining. You know, people like to be entertained by when someone makes a fool of someone else. But we want to be as charitable as possible, meaning we're trying to get as much meaning as we can from what the philosopher, what the debater is saying. And we bring out the premises, the conclusion in as accurate a way as we possibly can. And so that is also very important in argument analysis.
Of course, and we have also have to remember that the aim of any kind of conversation is to reach the truth. And yes. To that purpose, we have to avoid any kind of ambiguity or vagueness or provocations or maybe any small errors or grammatical mistakes that are included in the argument, in the question itself. So if we have this principle of charity, we avoid all these misunderstandings, and we talk to our interlocutor, and we don't consider the interlocutors to be our enemies, but our partners, our conversation partners.
Yeah, it's not as entertaining, you know, but it's the goal is to reach the truth as opposed to defeating your interlocutor or making them look bad. You want to join them in this search for truth. And to do this, we have to understand exactly where they're coming from and to make it as clear as possible through the principle of charity.
That's great. Now, what about establishing criteria on how to judge an argument? I mean, because we as listeners, or if we happen to be on the opposition side, we jump to conclusions and we want to judge our interlocutor as soon as possible. We know, for example, that some arguments are true by logic, like tautologies, as they don't need any external justification. But there's a school of philosophy called skepticism, where the skeptics themselves do not make any judgments, because the problem is that of criteria. So before making any kind of judgment and before establishing the truth of a proposition, they need a criterion to distinguish between the truth and falsehood. Now, there is a question here. How can we establish this criterion if we lack knowledge? And how can we be sure, 100% sure, that this criterion is true? Where do we start from?
Yeah, this is a very deep problem here, where the skeptics unleash a kind of like a poison, in a way, where you start to realize that there's maybe there is no way to find truth. And debates can reach this point where we have different positions, and then people say, well, no one really knows. No one knows. So skepticism is still around, and it's very, very clever. It's very powerful, and I don't know if I have an answer to it right now. But so maybe I can just state as you just kind of unpack the basic ideas here. So we're in a debate, and we have different sides to the debate, and we're trying to find knowledge, trying to find an answer to our question, and so to do this, we need a criterion. So we need to have this is a standard that we have that separates the truth from the falsehood. So we need this. So the criterion would say, okay, well, this is true and this is false. But what is this criterion? Where does this come from? So if our initial problem is we can't tell the truth from falsehood. Well, we have a criterion, but then what about the criterion itself? How do you tell if that criterion is true? So we could say, well, hey, your criterion is false. So you could have a debate. I was watching this debate recently. Someone was a strong Christian, and they were saying, my criterion would be the Bible. But how do you know that criterion is true? And so you have to dig deeper. And the skeptic said, either you just accept that you have certain unjustified assumptions, that everyone has certain unjustified assumptions that they're making. And there's really no way to have full knowledge. Either you say, well, there is no possibility of knowledge, or you have to have an infinite regress, where you say, well, okay, well, there's a criterion of the criterion of the criterion, and it goes on and on and on.
You're out
and
in
so
circles.
You're kind of in a trap here. They put us in a trap where, and it's very complex. There's been attempts to answer this problem. I know that Wittgenstein has a book that I recommend called Uncertainty. That there's an attempt to answer this, and also St. Augustine has a book on Against the Skeptics. But I think that's maybe too much for here. I think it's just good to just establish the problem.
But I also like, I'm sorry to interrupt you, I also like Thomas Aquinas. He also stated very clear. I mean, you've got to start from somewhere by having objections, and then start refuting your own objections until you come to conclusions. That's also
he has a great method. You're right. He has a great method of I forget what it's called. There's a word for it, but maybe it's like a disputational method, where he if you read his works, he will begin by the objections. He'll list them, and then he'll respond to them one by one.
Exactly.
It's quite interesting, and that was the style they had in the university. I wish we could maybe bring that back, where the students would have a structure for a question. They begin with a question, and then have a series of objections, and then respond to each objection. So, yeah.
That would also be great.
Yeah.
Now, moving on to the structure of the argument again, there are many rhetoricians who are skilled at deception and manipulation of the masses.
Sure.
How can we build our capacity for detecting how someone is reasoning so as to identify the weak links? And is it always easy for the audience to distinguish between the fake and the true premises of their sayings? Let's imagine the politicians who always deliver their speeches to their electorate. I mean, they always appeal to emotions. They seem to be rhetoricians, but not in the sense of ancient Greek rhetorics like Socrates, for example.
Yeah, it's okay to, and emotions are part of being human. It's there, but they have to be properly formed. Now, what we are exposed to in our political discourse, as you have a critique of democracy. You mentioned a critique of democracy on your YouTube channel. This is part of the problem, I think. A true democracy should engage people in a rational way, but we're not being engaged in a rational way. And how do we combat this? How do we, build the capacity for people to detect these issues? The mapping, I'll go back to that point I made earlier. Start doing mapping. It may seem kind of maybe boring, or maybe slowing down things too much, but it's like building a muscle. You have something on social media, don't respond to it right away. Map it out. Get the logic of that argument. How does the argument work? And then you can start seeing, weak points. So you have that. Now, we also have to understand, and you alluded to this, an argument is very complex. An argument has not only a logical structure, but also it has claims. It's making claims as well. And these claims could be true or false. So a logical structure could be good, but the premises could be false. So that's why we have to build these habits of mapping. We have this in higher education in the United States. We have some exposure to logic, although it's very limited, but not in high school, which I don't understand. So building a capacity for mapping, it builds a habit. You can start to see, okay, the logic. So someone could be reasoning very well, but their premises could be true or could be false or very questionable. Someone could have a set of assumptions that they're using, and they're reasoning well, but their assumptions are wrong, and also it has to do with the ethics of the person. What is their heart? Where is their heart? What do they really care about? And so they could be reasoning very well, but what do they really care about in their heart? In what are their goals in life, their values? The
ethical reasoning, as it is called.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it dovetails with this as well. So what are they trying to accomplish? What is their ultimate value? Is their value like maybe hedonism, their own pleasure, or is their value their country, or is it their religion? We have to unpack all these things and we see all these components at work, not just the logic. That's part of it too. But someone could be very logical, but they have maybe a flawed assumption at the heart of their reasoning, or they have some sort of corruption in their character. And Socrates was very good at with the Socratic method, unpacking these layers within the person.
Yes, of course. So it has to do with how trained you are, so that you can disclose if there are any false premises, which are going to lead to false conclusions. They're not going to agree with the state of affairs anyhow.
Right.
So it's a crucial thing, this one raised.
Yeah.
And let's think about arguments. If we draw a conclusion from the particular to the universal, as it is done through an inductive argument, or vice versa, with a deductive argument, we've got two ways of reasoning. However, there are weak points when it comes to inductive arguments, which give way to stereotypes, which in turn blur the image and do not give the correct representative sample. I wonder what Aristotle has to say on the universality of an argument.
Yeah, well, he categorized arguments, and you have these basic distinctions between the inductive and the deductive. So it's very important to be able to. This is part of argument mapping. You know how the person is reasoning. So you could have deductive, where you take a universal. Something is. I have the quote here. An attribute which belongs to every instance of its subject, and to every instance essentially and as such, from which it clearly follows that all universals inhere necessarily in their subjects. Okay, so you have certain features of a thing or a concept that are universal to that concept. So, for instance, bachelor, right? A bachelor could be tall, short, it could have a mustache, they could have no mustache, whatever. But a bachelor is essentially unmarried. So you can't be a bachelor and be married. It's not possible. It's not a reality. You can't have a square that is a circle. You see, so there's certain essential attributes of a concept. And so you can use deductive reasoning here. You can say, well, there's a concept, it has these essential characteristics, and therefore all members of that class have this characteristic. Okay, so if someone's a bachelor, well, then you know that they're unmarried. So that's deductive reasoning. Now, oftentimes, though, we use inductive reasoning. Maybe it's a little more tricky, because you're trying to work from the particular to the universal. So it's the other way around, where you're saying, okay, I have these little data points.
For example, when you do historical research.
Yeah, so this would be according to different disciplines that you're in. So like if you're a Euclid doing geometry, you're working with deduction. You're taking universal features of shapes. But if you're doing like history, you can't deduce. You can't say, well, by logic, I know that.
You gather bits and pieces from here, from there, and gradually you build something.
Yeah, and it's a perfectly legitimate way of thinking. but the thing is that it's probabilistic. You don't have the deductive power where you can say, so a bachelor is certainly unmarried. There's just no doubt. There's no way. If he's married, he's not a bachelor. It's that simple. If it's a triangle, it's not a square. Okay. But if I'm trying to do historical research, maybe like, is Jesus a historical person? Did this person actually exist historically? Well, what do I know? Well, what do I have? Various documents, various testimonies. We have these writers. We have various maybe items, objects. That, and we rebuild the claim. So we take, maybe we're trying to solve a crime. Okay, we have someone's testimony, okay, but does that mean for sure the person committed the crime? No. But we can build a picture that's more and more compelling the more pieces we have, and the more likely it becomes that we're on the right track. Now, let's see. You mentioned stereotypes, and this is an easy trap to fall into, where you just believe that, you've seen some evidence, and then the mind takes a shortcut. Our mind likes simplicity, so we like to have things very, very, very neat. So we'll have a little bit of evidence. We'll learn something about a certain group of people, and then we'll generalize. So all people of that kind have these attributes. So people will like this feeds into certain racial prejudices. We have to be more careful taking bits of data and then generalizing them. Be more patient. We may not have the universal yet, just by having certain bits of data.
Yeah, I mean, this is exactly it. I mean, when these rhetoricians try to manipulate their audience through metaphors of war, as they're called, when they argue, they tend to stick to their points of view. For example, they never listen to their interlocutors. Their priority is motivism over reasoning, and there's also a tendency to beat around the bush, rarely touching upon deeper issues with a shared epistemology and a higher purpose in mind. I mean, we should avoid all this stuff and focus on the role of the tradition of rhetoric and the role it plays in argumentation. You have mentioned Socrates, who was engaged in dialogues with sophists, and he would be very glad to be refuted if he said anything untrue, but also to refute others if they would say something invalid. But for him, it would be better to be refuted than to refute, so that he would get rid of evil, and that he would see that he was wrong, and he was very happy for that. So as a last question, what kind of attitude shall we eventually have whenever we take part in debates or in simple discussions? I mean, what questions shall we ask ourselves before taking part in any arguments? How can arguing be positive?
I mean, you mentioned Socrates and just the humility. He was ironic. He would use irony, where he would maybe pretend.
But in the good sense, in the good sense, irony in the good sense, I would say, yeah.
Yeah, maybe he would say, well, he would let the person kind of talk, and he would say, well, I don't know anything about this topic. Could you tell me? And the person would think that they would be very arrogant. They would think, I know. This is very easy. And as Socrates is a great philosopher. He showed it's not that easy. It's right away that person would stumble. So, and you're right that it wasn't about the ego of Socrates making someone look bad. People got very upset with him, but it seems like it was not about. He wasn't trying to embarrass them. He just, this can happen where we engage someone in a frank conversation, and we're just looking for the truth. And I've had this happen to myself. People will run away. They don't want to talk about in a serious way because they're afraid. They're
That's
afraid.
what I thought of.
Yeah, they're afraid. They want to just attack you, and then if you say, well, slow down, let's just talk. Let's just explore this view, and they don't want to. They're afraid of it because there's lots of psychology. There's the ego. People don't have the detachment. It's the ego. They're very attached to their view, and that's what led to Socrates being tragically killed.
Yeah, but we've got to come back to this rhetorical model to see. We've got to see arguments as performances in front of an audience, and we've got to think of our interlocutors as dance partners, metaphorically speaking, rather than war opponents and enemies. The point is to get the most out of it at the very end, to become a better arguer and a good arguer.
Yeah.
So
and I think social media may have something to do with this, where people are rewarded for demeaning their interlocutor.
Exactly.
You get more likes if you ridicule someone else. And I agree that. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that's where the conversation usually stops. It doesn't go any further.
Yeah.
There's no point in doing such a thing.
It's not healthy.
Yeah. You're not solving any issues here. On the contrary, you've got to ask yourself, why do we argue in the first place? And if there's a good reason to convince others, is it a nice thing to do? And are there any hidden motives as I speak, as I deploy my thoughts behind my ideas? I don't want to disclose. We've got to ask ourselves such questions.
Yeah. Yes, I think it can be a very good process. It can be very, very enjoyable. It can be it can make you a better person. And you start to understand yourself better. What are my motivations? What am I afraid of? What am I seeking? But some people, it's like the allegory of the cave, right? The people, they like to stay in that cave. Many people like to stay in there. They think that they don't want to be told that, it's not really a good place to be in.
Yeah, and I also agree with those people who believe that if argument is war, then learning is losing, because if you lose, you win. there's a cognitive win at the very end.
Right.
You know what is missing, and you manage to connect the dots, and you eventually find the light at the end of the tunnel. Because before you start engaging in the conversation, you have a new entry approach to these arguments. And as you speak, you have this in mind, this mentality in mind, and eventually you come up with the right conclusions. And why? Because you happen to find the right strategies, exit strategies as well.
Yeah, I like that, how you put it. You
Yeah.
know, losing the argument is actually winning, because you've learned something, you know.
Of course.
But
I mean,
yeah,
I don't pretend to be a know-it-all teacher or professor, or I don't. I'm not proud of having, let's say, 10 degrees or certificates of any kind. I mean, titles don't count that much as the attitude of an interlocutor once he or she engages in a conversation.
yeah. None of that matters. None of the titles, and that can actually distract from a good debate. You know,
Of course,
because you know, someone could say, you know, just because I have a certain degree, that therefore everything I say is true.
Of course.
That's not the case.
And you can see the lack of communication when it comes to diplomacy in foreign policy among the countries. They agree to disagree. That happens all the time. And why? Because neither side wants to admit that there's something more to be gained out of a dialogue if both sides are willing to contribute fairly, their fair share.
Yeah, you can see these problems in many walks of life. Yeah.
That's it. Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Dal Monte, for today's online discussion about argument analysis techniques. And what do we have to remember? So to win, you also have to lose, but losing is also winning. There's also the cognitive win at the end of the conversation, if you are to become a good arguer. So we have to imagine ourselves both as arguers, but also as listeners, watching ourselves argue. And whenever we lose, we have to say to ourselves, oh, that was a good argument.
Yeah, it takes humility. You know, humility.
Of course.
Humility. It's very liberating when you don't take yourself so seriously. You know, it's okay to lose, and then you can have a good time and learn something. So
that's it. So thank you very much for being with us today, and we hope to meet again in the near future.
For sure.
Have a nice afternoon. Thank you very much.
You too, Dimitris.